So I've called this week's project Mid-Tone Start, and it's very much about the process of making drawings and paintings rather than subject matter. So I was hoping that you might be happy to find some subject matter of your own for this particular week, but I was looking through some of the subjects that we've tackled over the weeks and months, and examples like the mantelpiece that we started with, or the market shop, chairs. Do you remember using a chair as a kind of stage to put objects on? Handheld, where you had some ideas about using your hand as the kind of anchor for some sort of composition and theme. The writer or the letter. So I'm just listing those as things that when I look back over them, I thought they might have some potential for you to revisit. What I'm going to do is work with some figurative subjects, the girls going swimming in the sunset. So I've got some photographs, and I'm going to start doing some drawings, and then I'm going to go on to some paintings. I am both excited and nervous. Excited because I'm going to try out this time-lapse app that I saw Karen using to great effect on Facebook. Nervous because I might give away too many secrets, and then you think, oh, is that how he does it? And not be so impressed if you are impressed. Anyway, so back to this process then. So I'm going to start by doing a few drawings, just in a way reminding you of things that you already know, but maybe explaining them better, or explaining them in a way that might mean something different this time. Going to do a few drawing approaches quite quickly, and then go on to some painting. And I hope that you'll be able to, whether you find a lemon and start with a lemon or go into something more involved, that you'll see some value in the way in which I'm trying to demonstrate a process. So this first, I'll have a go at the arrangement at the top. I've just got some grey pastel paper, and I'm going to work, first I'll work with a few lines, and the whole idea of a mid-tone start, this grey paper is mid-tone. I'm going to put on some dark marks with charcoal, and I'm going to put on some light marks with chalk, and I will very quickly get some sort of an idea as to whether I like my composition. And I think at the moment I'm probably just going to go straight for what's in my photograph. So just I'll do one figure in line, because that's one way of working. I like to do a continuous line. And my figures, this photograph's pretty dark actually. They went swimming as the sun was setting over Cockle Bay. Only the girls went, the boys were too afeared. So there's one figure, and because it's quite kind of silhouetted and tonal, I'll do that, might smudge slightly. So I can do one figure like that, or of course, as I've been encouraging you, maybe another. In fact, let's get the rock in first. That would make sense. And then some of the other figures, maybe I should just do them, with the side of the charcoal. One there, and then can put in a few lines and even use the eraser to change them. So initially what I'm demonstrating here, if this is an approach to, in my case, take a photograph and try and extract from the photograph some useful information, I quite quickly, by putting down some either some line drawings or some tonal shapes, quick bit of refining. I can take away some of the things I didn't want, and I can also introduce the lighter tone using my chalk. So we've got a light in the sky, and you know, it's probably worth emphasizing I'm thinking in terms of a process and basically managing the emphasis. So here in my sunset picture, you know, we've got brighter light where the sun is, so I'll brighten that up with the chalk, and then we've got this light on the water effect. So I haven't put all the figures in, but that's just to show you how quickly, in a way, I can go from the mid-tone and then start to introduce darker and lighter contrast. And I think anything that helps you work out quickly what to emphasize or how to emphasize it is very valuable. So as I say, it's very much about the process. Because I started on mid-tone, maybe like half the work's done. And the work now for me as the artist is deciding what to emphasize. You know, do I give them a bit more contrast within the figures? Do I draw attention to the light in the sky, the light on the water, and so on? So that's starting on some grey paper, and I'll pause and start in a different way. So another way, rather than starting on grey paper, is to cover some white paper with willow charcoal and smudge it, rub it in, and then here we have our mid-tone. It's really worth rubbing it in well, so you've got a grey, and I'm going for this set. So this time, I'll just carry on with the charcoal. So what have we got? We've got our rock over here. And maybe I'll raise them all up a bit. And then we've got our figures. So this definitely is a process of, for my subject, you know, figures emerging from the dark and becoming lighter, or being defined by light shapes. And then being able to, as I've described already, sort of manage the light and manage the emphasis. So this is a great figure here, because she looks like she's changed her mind and isn't going in. So that's putting on some darker tone, and as you would expect, I can then work with the eraser and subtract. So really what I want to emphasize, all this makes sense to you, I'm sure, because you do it, but I'm trying to relate it particularly to the whole idea of a process which leads from a bit of an idea, I want to do these figures, or I want to do this still life, from the idea to the way in which you emphasize and achieve the particular aim. I don't know, we've used words like message, aim, what's the point of the image? And I think by having this way of starting in the middle, so I'm leaving a figure out, I think, by starting in the middle and gradually introducing contrast. I'm doing black and white at the moment, I'll do colour in a minute, but by gradually introducing contrast, you can be much more aware of the way in which you work towards a conclusion. and you can be more conscious of what you select to emphasize, to draw attention to, and so on. So there we go, starting in the middle, this time with something tonal, an all over tonal start, and then working out from it. And again, I then, because I've got these kind of silhouetted figures, I can then start introducing a certain amount of contrast, definition, if I think that's necessary. So that's the mid-tone start on white paper with charcoal. So next I'll try a little bit of colour. So this time I'm going to work in colour. I'm still drawing, but working in colour, but working from mid-tone. Well, I'm working from a mid-tone surface, so it's a bit of brown pastel paper, but I'm going to work with, if you like, graded colours. So my subjects have got these blues and browns, and I'm going to work from the brown to some orange to some sort of Naples yellow, and the blue, I'm working from the blue to a lighter blue to a very pale blue. So as I started the other ones, I'll start this, so I'll maybe work with my brown first. This isn't the darkest brown, actually, it has to be said. Let's see. And in fact, I'll do quite a lot. I'll do this all in the brown. That makes sense to me. Because I think the brown is the right colour for the figures and for a lot of the landscape as well. So again, I repeat myself, but there is a point I want to get across, which is I'm starting in the middle. So the brown isn't too colourful, but it is a little bit darker. So it's in a way the idea is to work towards making your contrasts stronger, work towards making your emphasis. And if you can work in this way, you'll very often find that you're able to see almost the conclusion arriving because of the way you're building up to it. I don't know if I made sense there. Anyway, so let's try a little bit of blue costume in some of them, because they are wearing blue costumes. And in that way I can mix these blues and browns. A little bit approximate. I might get a little bit of blue into the rocks as well. I think that blue... No, go on, that blue's got to go in the water. I think that's what I've got to do. And I'll give that a bit of a smudge. I could have smudged the browns as well. So at this stage, it's not unlike my charcoal drawing, because the image isn't very strong, it isn't very clear. It's going to get clearer, it's going to get stronger. I could, for example, get a bit more of this light in the sky. So hopefully you're witnessing a gradual process. And there's a kind of logic to this, and there's a value in the way in which standing back from your picture, you can see things that are already working. You know, the parts of the drawing that I'm not necessarily going to emphasize may already be done. What's an example of that? I don't know. I think parts of the figures actually are more solid. I might need to get... This is a sort of grey. I don't know if that's the right colour, but... So I'm moving on now to trying to bring out a bit more contrast with the light, but together with that might be a little bit more colour. For example, in my sky. And then perhaps going back to these figures now and making them a little bit more definite. And I explained at the beginning the number of colours that I was using, and there will come a point soon where I haven't got enough and I want to add to them. So for example, I would darken their hair. I could just go to black and white actually, but I think since I'm trying to illustrate something in colour, it might be better to stay with colour and continue that sort of sequence. So I'm now using a darker brown for the hair, for example. And I think that's quite helpful because it means that I'm staying with colour, and I might get some other colours, you know, where there is light on these figures. I might want to start putting in some of that contrast. Might go even lighter than that, and more colourful than that. So that was really trying to make the same points, but this time working with colour, starting in the middle and working out and I sorted out my colours. I started on a mid-tone colour pastel paper, but I have been sorting my colours out into light and dark colours, but with a contrasting palette. I'm just trying to make that a bit blacker, and so on. Okay, so let's hold that there and now look a little bit at painting. So my painting start is on some canvas that I've tinted a bit, and I'm going to begin, as you may often do, with so it's tinted canvas, and I'm just working with some burnt umber, and I'm sketching out my painting, and that might be a familiar way of working to you. So by tinting the canvas, I can then, as I did with the drawings, I can eventually put on lighter and darker contrasts, and I can work with lines or silhouettes and so on, in order to get something of my subject working. So that's not such a new approach, you would say. Isn't that what I always do? So fair enough. So let's do something different. Let's get rid of that. Rub it in. And trying to sort of reflect this idea of not starting in the middle. Maybe rather than working with the darker brown, I'll mix in just a little bit of white with my burnt umber, so that I can still work with lines, with tonal shapes and so on. But actually what I start with is going to be just a little bit quieter. So a figure like this. So I've not started at the extreme of the darkest colour. I've started again in the middle, you might say, with something just a little bit softer. And the thing about that is, having established this figure, for example, I just take that as my example, having established that in a slightly lighter, softer way, I can then go to the stronger, the unmixed brown, and put in some of the contrast. I've not got to colour here, but it might be things like hair, costume, and that makes a big difference. That's added definition. But because I started with that mid-tone, I can be more selective about this definition. So I'll pause now because I'm going to do one more thing, which is to prepare my canvas with some wet ground. So rather than just having it rubbed in like this, it's actually going to be a reasonable amount of paint. So I'm going to paint into wet paint. So to some more painting. I've worked a little bit on that sketch, developed it a bit further, put the other figures in. But I must say, actually, I worked in black and white, as you can see, and I've brought out a lot of contrast, but actually I quite like what's happening in the colour one, because again, it's a bit softer. So soft might be what I'm after, but I'm going to work with that drawing. And I have covered my canvas with some grey paint. So I mixed some ultramarine and some burnt umber, and I've covered it. So I've not rubbed this in quite the way I did the other one. This is a wet surface, and I'm now going to work into that with a dark mixture, which is the same combination of ultramarine and burnt umber. But because I'm painting into a wet surface, it's going to mix. And so my whole mid-tone idea, you'll see that that's running out, or the dark is losing its edge. And so I'll have to pick up more if I want to make it work. But this is something then that I'm incorporating into the way that I work. So as it mixes all the time, on the one hand that can seem like a frustration, but on the other hand, if I've got a good supply of, in this case the black, I can actually go back and make new marks to build up that emphasis. So a bit like what I demonstrated with the last approach, it's still a little bit quiet, and I have the means to make it a bit stronger if I want to, but what I've been talking a lot about is the idea of building up to things. So the fact that it's a bit quieter actually helps me with that process. Now I'm doing this in oil, and obviously oil stays wet and allows me to do this. I'm aware that some of you might work in acrylic, and what I'd suggest for acrylic, if you want to sort of emulate this process, it's not going to be quite as it's not going to be possible to do it exactly as I'm doing, but what you can do with acrylic is before it dries, just dab it with a rag. So work in such a way, this is oil, so but you could just dab it as you work and take it back a bit. So that that's a suggestion for those who can't do oil or won't be doing oil but would still like to work with this process. So what I'm going to do now then is I'm going to carry on with this painting, and I'm going to switch to a different way of filming. going to try some time lapse. I don't know how far I'll get and how well it'll work, but I'll sort of tag it on to the end of this video. But what I've come to lastly then is this working into a wet surface and using that as a way of allowing you to have a mid-tone start. And what I'll go on to do is develop this painting with colour, but to continue to work with a wet surface. So I'll be painting wet in wet. Eventually it'll become difficult to get paint to stick, and I'll have to do quite a lot of floating. So I'll have described that to most of you in the studio, not painting like this with the brush going straight onto the canvas, but picking up paint and holding the brush parallel to the surface so that the paint doesn't mix so much. So controlling the mixing, but controlling it at this later stage of the process when I'm trying to increase the contrast of colour, tone, and so on. But I'm trying to produce something, generally trying to produce paintings that have a bit more atmosphere and this softer quality, which can start with a mid-tone beginning and be a gradual introduction of contrast, is certainly helpful for that atmospheric quality. So I'll end this here and go on to a time-lapse approach.